Book review! That's right, for some reason you guys still want me to make these. Yeah, they're connected. They're part of a tetralogy. Spring Snow. Let's start with Spring Snow in the right order. Hooray for me, everybody. The author Yuki Mishima believed in the code of ethic of Bushido, which is the samurai code of ethic. He wanted to restore that and also restore the power to the emperor. That's now, I think it's important to understand at least that despite Yuki Mishima being against, like many other Japanese people, the westernization of Japan, a lot of people still recognize it. Feels very familiar as opposed to his other work. Assume that since I said I was going to read the book, I could discuss it in its fullest, but I read previously Samurai Family, but that became Nouveau Rich because the cultural changes and the Meiji period and the benefits from that. But Kyuaki is very childish. Emotions for Satoko. He acts like a very spoiled teenage brat about it. At one point he loves her, another point he despises her, and it sort of goes back and forth. But it's very fun to follow this around Kyuaki, despite so later on he meets up with Satoko. I really enjoyed this bit. It focuses a lot on these type of events that just seems uninteresting and trivial and unimportant. It's not until Satoko is completely out of Kyuaki's reach. I think this is just me speculating, but Kyuaki represents New Japan from the Meiji period. Kyuaki himself sees his family later on in a bad light because they let go of their roots, their samurai roots in a sense. The book was because of its poetic style. It sounds so pretentious for me to say, but the way it reads, most importantly, getting the insight of this very fascinating period of time through the eyes of Kyuaki. I really enjoyed it. Very nice. 4 out of 5. Did you read it? Did you like it? What did you think? Runaway Horses. Where do I begin? This book. I know it's a bit annoying, but I'm gonna preface this novel as well with some history. Because just like Spring Snow, the novel Spring Snow takes place right at the end of the Meiji period. Runaway Horses takes off right after an historical event in Japan, which is called the May 15 incident, which really happened. A cooler name for the May 15 incident is the Blood League incident. Damn, that's edgy. Sorry, League of Blood incident. Mishima often takes real historical event in Japan. For example, he wrote the Temple of the Golden Pavilion, which is about a monk that burned down the temple of the Golden Pavilion, and he sort of fictionalizes a story of what that was like for the monk and what went through his head. And in the similar sense, Mishima did this with Runaway Horses but in this time he echoes the event instead, which will make sense later on. To put it briefly, the League of Blood incident was a group of samurai that tried to restore power to the emperor by killing a bunch of political people. I'm describing this, I'm just trying to keep it quick. And it failed. They got captured, but so many people of Japan didn't agree with their sentencing, so they signed with blood. 350,000 people signed with blood and set it in to lessen the sentence for the capture. That's just a little bit of backstory. Okay, let's get into it. Let's just jump into it. Runaway Horses follow the story of Isao. He is 17 years old. He was brought up in the code of Bushido, which we know is the samurai code of ethics. He is level 3 in Kendo. I don't know what that means, but I think it means he's a badass. Isao is the reincarnation of Kyuaki. So this takes place 17 years after Spring Snow. Did I just spoil Spring Snow? Oopsie. So the character Honda, if you remember, he makes a reappearance. He's now a judge, and he meets up with Isao by chance, and he realizes that he is the reincarnation of his old friend Kyuaki. Isao wants to give Honda his favorite book, which is The League of the Divine Wind, which is inspired by another rebellion, another coup d'etat that actually happened during the Meiji period. It was a group of people, a group of samurai, same thing again, revolt against the Meiji government, restore power to the emperor. They were a smaller group of samurai, but they were very tactical and used surprise to their advantage. They managed to actually make a large impact despite eventually failing and committing seppuku. I think the important thing to take away from this is that the Shinpuren rebellion, as it's called, despite it being a failure and despite them committing seppuku, it's seen as a success in the way that it inspired other rebellions and more afterwards. It's seen as a way for a small group of dedicated people having a larger impact. And Isao, the character in the book, sorry, it keeps mixing fiction and history, which I think is what makes it so interesting. Isao is so inspired by this book and the people and their intentions, giving their life to their cause, that he wants to start his own group in the essence of the League of the Divine Wind. Recruits a bunch of younger students by showing them the book and asking, how do you feel about this book? Does this inspire you? And he gets a very loyal group of 20 people, and he plans to do an attack very similar to the May 15 incident. It's planned out in the intention of inspiring other people and having as much effect as you can as a small group, and then to commit seppuku. So they plot to kill the country's capitalist, but before they're able to go forth with their plan, Isao gets betrayed. And that's all I need to say with the story. Runaway Horses is vastly different from Spring Snow, but it still shares common themes around the purity of youth versus the corruption of the adult. It's about the willingness to sacrifice yourself for the greater good and what you believe in, and also the envy and jealousy of that glory, of having something worth dying for. But I think most importantly, the major theme of this novel is I don't know exactly. To know and not to act is not to truly know. Yukio Mishima himself, the author, a well-acclaimed, well-regarded, rich, famous author, created his own military, the Tatenokai. On the same day as he finished his tetralogy, he left the last page in his office open. He left with 4 members of his Tatenokai, his military group. He went to the military Tokyo headquarters. He kidnapped the commander, barricaded himself in the headquarters, told the media to come and see what he had to say, and in the hopes of inspiring the soldiers out in the courtyard, he gave his speech for the same reason as Isao and all these other rebellions against the Meiji period, to restore glory to the emperor. Yukio Mishima knew this would fail, but as we know, failure doesn't necessarily mean the ending. Despite him wanting to inspire these soldiers, and despite him knowing that they probably wouldn't listen to him, he knew that to know and not to act is not to truly know, and he lived and died by those words. So after delivering his speech, he went inside, he wrote his death poem, and he went down on his knees and committed seppuku. His death poem and the event of his death very much reflect Runaway Horses. His poem reads, "A small night storm blows, saying falling is the essence of a flower, preceding those who hesitate." The last words that was left in his final book on his desk said, "Human life is limited, but I want to live forever." I will give this book 5 out of 5! 10 out of 10! 100 out of 100. Next up, I read Sapiens. It was recommended by my parents. Thank you, parents. Sapiens is the telling of the story of humankind. I put all the effort into the Mishima. I don't know what I'm gonna say. It tells the major revolutions of human history. The cognitive, the agriculture, the empire, and the scientific revolution. It tells the story of mankind in a third-person perspective, as if aliens talked about us, which is so weird and bizarre, but still very gripping and interesting. It's a super easy read. It starts off by telling historical facts about how mankind changed throughout history. But then as we get to closer to current time, the author, it's clear that the author is putting a lot of his own assertions in there, and it becomes a bit blurred, I will say. A lot of times without any evidence as well. Reading it, you kind of go, I'm not sure if I'm buying this. I don't know. Have you read it? Would you agree with me on that? It seems that the author has his own ideas about certain things like capitalism and socialism, and these, I guess they're complex things to describe anyway. The bias of the author, to me, is clear in there, at least, and that sort of muddied the waters. But regardless, I really enjoyed this book. It's super fascinating for anyone to reflect what it's like to be a Sapiens. It's pretty fun. The chapters that I enjoyed the most was about morals, because I never thought about how morals have shifted so much throughout our time. I thought I had it pretty clear what I think is right and wrong, but put me in any other time in history, and it doesn't really match anymore what other people think. And same thing in the future, our morals will probably be completely different as well. And it almost gave you a sort of nihilistic view and hopelessness of it's all this constant shift of mankind. But what I thought was the most interesting was talking about Buddhism, because I didn't know how aligned the morals of Buddhism is with today's society, despite being written 2,000 years ago, I think. So after reading Sapiens, I knew I wanted to read more Buddhism, about Buddhism. I previously just brushed it away because I thought, well, Buddhism, that's for unmarried women who's going through a midlife crisis. Give this book 3 out of 5, by the way. But afterwards, I read In the Buddha's Words, an anthology of discourses from the Pali Canon. This book is amazing. Buddha never wrote down his words. They were just retold. And a lot of times, ideas get shifted and spread out too much that it's hard to understand how to study Buddhism. So this book gives a more defined frame of the Buddha's teachings. A lot of the ideas already align with how I perceive things, especially how you should perceive your emotions. You should still feel happy, you should still feel anger, but you should feel it disconnected. A lot of ideas I also realized was resembled to Dr. Frankl's logotherapy from the book we read in the past. Remember? Man's Search for Meaning. I draw the resemblance on how you should live your life, because I remember Frankl talked about you should perceive life as if you've already lived it once and made all the mistakes, because that prevents you from falling into destructive behavior. And the Buddhist karma system in a lot of ways is similar. You live your life correctly once, and that's all you need. The goal is not to relive your life. The goal is to cease to exist and reach enlightenment and reach Nibbana. Now you do this in many different ways, but one of the main things is to remove all cravings from your life, because craving leads to suffering, and suffering leads to rebirth. And to be born is to suffer, and to live is to suffer. I know I'm explaining this very poorly, by the way. And the Buddhist ideology around removing craving is to uproot it completely, because otherwise it will always be there. And only if you do that is when you can reach enlightenment. And there's something really interesting about that. When is enough enough? I was super fascinated by this book. This is just a very selected part of it. I don't want to get into all of it. If you're interested in Buddhist teaching, this is a great book to start off with. And if your life is sugar, give it a go. Can't hurt. Next up, I wanted to get into Greek philosophy. I'm not gonna just jump into it this time. This time I'm gonna search, okay, what should I know before I read Greek philosophy? And a lot of people say, okay, well, you should start reading the Myths. Mythos with Stephen Fry. I thought he was just a stand-up comedian, but apparently he's an author as well. This is probably not the book I wanted to read, but I enjoyed it very much regardless. Stephen Fry being a comedian, you can tell he does an excellent job at retelling the ancient Greek myths. You probably are familiar with so many of them already, and so was I, but it was still very, very interesting. It's almost like reading fairy tales. In a lot of ways, I would love to, if I had a kid, I know it sounds so weird. I would love to read them Greek mythology, because they really feel like bedtime stories. Obviously, a lot of them are inappropriate. A lot of them are based on sexual endeavors, but still, I really enjoy them because not only you realize a lot of our language derives from the ancient Greek mythologies, like words like chaos, chronos, Thanos. Thanos, yeah, that's right, he means death. I can't believe ancient Greek copied Fortnite. A lot of the stories describe how phenomenon exists that they couldn't explain, such as how did the universe come to be about? Well, it was Chronos before it was chaos, and how did the first spider come about? And these really clever, interesting stories about these things. It's really fun. Definitely fun book to read. 3.5 out of 5. I don't know, I don't have much to say about it. It's not the book I wanted to read, but I had fun anyway. Okay. Last but not least, The Inferno by Egg Stringberg, or August Strindberg. Again, this is not a good introduction to Egg Stringberg. I don't know why. I picked it just because the only one I had. Did you read it? I did say I was going to read it for next month. It follows the mental struggle of Egg Stringberg at his later years. It was never really confirmed what was wrong with August, but you read what he's writing. I think it's taken from his diary, and there's clearly some form of paranoid schizophrenia going on. He's trying to experiment on how to create gold, and people are paranoid about people stealing his ideas, and it's very fascinating but very bizarre to read. It's like reading the notes of a madman almost. Obviously he wasn't fully crazy. Something was definitely going on. He was inspired by the work of Swedenborg, I assume that's how it's pronounced, who described that hell is real and you can relive it on Earth. And Egg Stringberg drew a lot of resemblances himself to his own life to what Swedenborg described that this would happen. And Egg realizes that he lived through hell on Earth, hence the title, The Inferno. The real reason I wanted to read Egg Stringberg, and I want to read more of Egg Stringberg, is because my granddad, when I was young, I used to read a lot. I sort of refound this the love for reading after being obsessed with gaming for 10 years. When I was younger, I loved reading, and I loved sharing, discussing books with my granddad. Obviously, I was really young. I was like 10 or 12, so I don't know how much of a discussion it was, but he was so happy and fascinated that I liked reading. And I would read Sherlock Holmes because he loved Sherlock Holmes. He tried to get me into this private Sherlock Holmes group, but I was too young to really understand. I read a lot of Sherlock Holmes when I was a kid. Sadly, he passed away a few years ago. So now, you know, I would have loved to discuss books with him, or it would have been amazing. And that's why I wanted to read Egg Stringberg, because Egg Stringberg is one of the most famous authors in Sweden, and my granddad really looked up to him as well. So I wanted to find out more about why this is the wrong book to read that. But it's sad that I can't discuss novels with my granddad, but I'm very happy at least that I can do it here on this channel with you guys. I really appreciate all the support. That was it for book review. Thank you for watching. Next month, I'm just gonna pick one novel. It's gonna be light, it's gonna be easy, it's gonna be a sci-fi. It was recommended by you guys, so you better pick this one up, okay? It's called The Forever War by Joe Haldeman. All the books, I'll link them in the description if you wanted to check them out on Amazon. I'll get a referral as well from that, so very nice. And that's it. Thank you guys for leaving a like and showing all the support as always. Love you guys so much. And as always, goodbye.